I'm a big fan of cartoons. As a dude in his mid-20s, I was raised in a great era of cartoon availability. I got the tail end of the Cartoon Network golden era and the Renaissance and the revival. I got to watch peak Spongebob, Fairly Odd Parents, Jimmy Neutron, the good kids cartoons of Disney, and even Boomerang, thanks Time Warner TV. But there were always a handful of shows that were just extra funny to me, and even continued to be funny as I got older. One of which was J.G. Quintel's regular show on Cartoon Network. It was funny to me when I was 12, when I was 17, and now in my adult life, I still find new humor in the jokes that went over my head in my adolescence. Recently, I heard that regular show is being brought back with new episodes on Cartoon Network, which made me feel pretty stoked to hear, honestly. It feels like there hasn't been many good cartoons that people of all ages have been able to enjoy for a while. But maybe that's just because I don't own a TV and haven't really watched anything on network television in a few years. Regardless, I think the real reason is actually streaming services. Nowadays, people are able to curate exactly what they want to watch, both for themselves and their families. This leads to very compartmentalized styles of production. I'm sure Netflix, Hulu, and the old network programs that now hold contracts with HBO and Paramount have all attempted and successfully made kids shows that are popular with kids. But there was something about the kids' cartoons of a time past that was a bit different when it came to all age groups enjoying them. Before people had the ability to curate exactly what they wanted to watch at any given moment, there was network television. Now, it was up to the viewer to decide what channel they wanted to watch, but not necessarily what show. On top of that, it had to be watched on a TV for the most part. These shows weren't really accessible on a computer, iPad, or iPhone. In a lot of homes across the United States, families would often only have one or two TVs max, meaning that whoever was watching at the given time, well, everyone else had no choice but to watch it if they wanted to consume some wonderful moving pictures. And kids' networks were well aware of this. Now, when it comes to kids' programming, there is a fine line in, how do I say this, intellectual stimulation that occurs between age groups. Young kids like preschool to first, second grade have their own subset of weird television that a lot of the time isn't like a cartoon, but it is cartoonish. You know, I'm talking weird shit like Barney, Yo Gabba Gabba, The Wiggles, and all this content that is created exclusively for very, very young viewers. Weird colors, singing friendly characters. These all kept the attention of a little kid. But, roughly around that 7 to 8 years old mark is when programming begins to shift. The cartoons become a little bit more creative. The characters have distinct personalities, there's storylines, more advanced humor. All in all, the shows gain the ability to present a lot more since the viewer is able to understand a lot more. Now back to what I was saying earlier, the creators of these kids shows are aware that oftentimes a whole family may be watching these shows, or maybe a pair of older and younger siblings, or maybe even a babysitter is watching them. And since these shows were no longer just relegated to the complexity that a toddler could understand, it opens the door to a wider range of humor. At its core, a show like Spongebob is clearly for kids. A talking sponge who is very silly, going about his day-to-day in an underwater city, and at his core, SpongeBob is youthful. He's spiritually a child. But if you look at SpongeBob's first season as opposed to recent ones, you'll notice a clear shift in the show's tone and humor. New SpongeBob is just pure silliness for little kids. Its humor is very shallow, and its stories are even simpler than before. It's what you would expect from a kid's program, the wacky outrageousness that only a young child tends to find funny. And this largely has to do with the departure of SpongeBob's original creator, Stephen Hillenburg. In fact, he only worked on the show for 5 years, and those seasons he worked on are regarded as the best period the show ever produced. For good reason. When Hillenburg originally created the show, it was of course for kids, but he knew that it wouldn't be just kids that would be watching the show. When you think about it, the character of Spongebob is really a kid who lives in an adult world. He has a job, even owns his own home in the form of a pineapple under the sea. It's crazy that he afforded that on a fry cook salary. He has a pretentious neighbor / co-worker in the form of Squidward, an asshole boss in the form of Mr. Krabs, and a dopey unemployed best friend in the form of Patrick. In fact, Nickelodeon thought the show was too adult-themed for a kid's show, so as a compromise, Hillenburg added Miss Puff and the whole boating school as a compromise in relatability for its intended audience. But ultimately, Hillenburg's vision of a kids' show that would still be funny to a wider audience was exactly what kids' cartoons needed to be. It created the separation and maturity between the Wiggles and Blue's Clues and an older kid. It was still innocent enough, but had underlying jokes, messages, themes, and references that an older audience could enjoy as well. And ultimately, it allowed for the show to have a deeper message for kids too. Some of the jokes I never understood as a kid, but I do see them now. And while it shocks me that they even allowed some of these jokes into the show in the first place, like SpongeBob showing a bar of soap and telling Gary not to drop them, that's insane for a children's show. But there were other elements of absurdist realism the show mixed in that one would more likely find on an Adult Swim program. The whole episode where they're on the Flying Dutchman's boat and Squidward gets thrown through a never-ending hell portal was weird to me as a kid, but as an adult, it's even funnier. I can imagine being a parent of a young child and being completely caught off guard by that scene. Same thing with the whole perfume department skit. I knew it was funny when I was a kid because the montage was funny, but as an adult, it's funny for a completely different reason. It's relatable at an older age. Hillenburg was a pioneer when it came to this sort of all-ages humor meshed into a kid's television program. I remember my parents cracking up at the Spongebob movie when David Hasselhoff showed up. I was laughing because he was basically a human jet ski and who is this guy? My parents were laughing because what the fuck is David Hasselhoff doing in a Spongebob movie? Aside from the humor that's appealing to all ages, Hillenburg managed to blend themes and references into his kids' show that an adult could appreciate too. The Spongebob movie is a kid's adaptation of classic Greek literature. That's right, it's the Odyssey, something I didn't realize until I was in my 20s. Hillenburg also explored ideas way beyond his target audience's general understanding and age. The episode where Squidward moves into Squidville, a community where everyone is just like him, is heavy-hitting as a child, but also more heavy-hitting as an adult. It explores ideas of individual identity and mass conformity. Squidward thinks it will be paradise, but ultimately hates it because it erodes his sense of individualism, and it also explores the idea that one's perceived imperfections about their lives are often what makes life interesting. He missed the chaos of his neighbors, Patrick and Spongebob, and ultimately returned to being a bothered outsider. And the craziest thing Hillenburg did, in my opinion, was the way he weaved his favorite media into a child's show. Remember that episode where they get the time machine? It's called SB-129. That episode is full of references to media that a child is years away from viewing and understanding. He recreated the monolith scene from 2001: A Space Odyssey, and the whole sequence of Squidward alone in a vast empty white space, along with the title, is a reference to the George Lucas sci-fi dystopia film THX 1138. All things I didn't realize until well into my adult life. But that's what's so great about the show. I didn't realize how influential it was until I was an adult, and all these years later, I still find myself realizing his references and thinking about the themes that the show presented to me at a young age. SpongeBob would set the standard for this wider audience style of kids media for years to follow. And on the flip side of Hillenburg's creation, which was a kids show that ended up reaching a wider audience, there is J.G. Quintel, the creator of Regular Show, and he created a cartoon originally for adults that ended up being for everyone. When you boil it down, Regular Show draws a lot of similarities to SpongeBob. The show follows two youthful best friends, presumably in their late teens or early 20s, as they work their mundane job, have weird friends / co-workers, and deal with their asshole boss. But the plot lines are very different, of course. Originally, Quintel pitched Regular Show to Adult Swim in 2006, Adult Swim being Cartoon Network's late-night block of experimental adult-oriented cartoons and programming. Thankfully, his show was rejected, but it did get his foot into the door of Cartoon Network studios. He worked as a creative director on Flapjack, another bizarre Cartoon Network show, before repitching Regular Show in 2008 and eventually getting a contract. It would span for 8 seasons from 2010 to 2017 on Cartoon Network and is widely regarded as one of the last good shows the channel had created. While Regular Show and Spongebob do share a lot in common, there is also a clear difference. The story structure of each Regular Show episode is pretty formulaic. The two main characters, Mordecai and Rigby, are assigned an extremely mundane task at the park or go to do something fairly normal. They mess something up and everything is blown out of proportion on a cosmic level to the point that the events are surreal in nature. And at the end of the chaos, everything goes back to normal. As a kid, I thought this was funny. Then when I was like 14, it dawned on me, specifically after the episode Weekend at Benson's, great reference there, where the duo and their boss Benson drink the quote-unquote Mississippi Queen at a party, a drink filled with a bunch of hot sauce. While they drink it, the song lyrics Mississippi Queen, if you know what I mean, are blasting in the background as they experience essentially a psychedelic trip. Yeah, every episode is just them going through an acid trip or doing a drug trip. And at this point, any adult who watches the show can ascertain this illusion pretty clearly. And if you somehow don't think that, the spiritual pilot to the show, 2 in the AM PM, follows 2 store clerks as they accidentally take drugs and turn into a bird in a gumball machine. Oh, hey, it's Mordecai and Benson. And in all honesty, that's why I'm glad Adult Swim rejected the show. If the premise of every episode was just a drug trip, it wouldn't be as funny. Cartoon Network telling him to keep the basic plot, but take out the drug element completely changed the show's feeling and humor. On the surface of every episode, there was the surrealist events occurring out of the duo of lazy friends cutting corners and accidentally messing up their mundane work tasks. The insanity of the show was appealing to kids, and the characters were relatable to them, and the humor fit right in. But at a deeper glance, older viewers of the show found humor in a different way. There was the obvious innuendos to drug use on a kids show that occurred not just once, but literally every episode. There was also a lot of undertones and references to 80s and 90s culture the older viewer was able to understand and enjoy. And just like SpongeBob, some of these references were insanely obscure. The episode where the duo are setting a high score on an arcade game and a giant floating head bullies them and eventually explodes at the end when they beat his score was a weird reference to Billy Mitchell, a prominent arcade game record holder from the 80s and 90s. Regular Show also did a great job exploring more advanced themes than generally presented to its target audience, just as SpongeBob did. There's wide-spanning storylines about Mordecai struggling in relationships, an episode where Rigby's brother being an overall better person than him, and Rigby dealing with extreme jealousy that ultimately teaches a lesson of acceptance. Benson being revealed to have essentially been Neil Peart before his time at the park, tying into a lesson about settling down and being content with one's life. And honestly, the list goes on and on. Each side character's personal struggles are explored and used as a means to express lessons on the struggles of life and growing up that are applicable to both young and older audiences. I chose these 2 shows particularly due to the way they sort of mirror each other, but they are far from the only kids show of this era that successfully expanded their audiences to all ages. I could go into detail about other shows like Fairly Odd Parents or Ed, Edd and Eddy that all managed to do this in their own means, but that would take me an eon. There's also been other shows that were originally intended for adults that ended up being better as kids shows for the same reason. Another interesting phenomenon about kids shows reaching an adult audience is the adult-oriented reboot and spin-off. Some show creators actively choose to have their art targeted to a younger group, knowing that all ages can and will end up loving them. Samurai Jack was one of my favorite shows growing up as a kid, and it continued to be one of my favorite shows into my adult life. The art style was cool. Jack was an awesome character. It functionally taught the same lessons that a superhero show would teach, like selflessness and helping others, but did so in a way that felt more mature for kids. Artist Gendy Tartakovsky had a resume of making great kids shows for Cartoon Network, working on the Powerpuff Girls and Dexter's Laboratory notably. While these 2 shows definitely were targeted at kids and on a kids program, Samurai Jack was different. The show was weirdly mature for kids. It lacked a lot of dialogue, and its visually driven storytelling was achieved through incredible cinematography, even by adult show movie media standards. Of course, the intensity was broken up by silly moments and characters, which resulted in a show that had been made for kids being more acclaimed by adults for its narrative and artistic direction. Over a decade after the show's initial run, Genndy made the objective choice to finish the series with a 5th season on Adult Swim. Now, Genndy was still making the show for the same kids who had watched it all those years before, but he knew now that those kids were adults. The 5th season explored much deeper and darker themes than what was presentable on Cartoon Network years ago. There was romance, deep internal conflict, and graphic violence by animation standards. And in this case, the decision to finish the show for the audience as a mature cartoon made a lot of sense. The audience that knew Jack before had changed a lot, and Genndy made it so that so had Jack. The thematic progression, coupled with an in-universe and real-life time skip, paid homage to its viewers in a way, that they were older and could better understand the world that Genndy had presented to us all those years ago, because both we, the viewer, and Jack had grown up and changed. I think a reason people look back so fondly on these shows is for their ability to grow with you from childhood into your adult life. As a kid, you're able to understand the surface level of these shows for what they are designed to be. They are funny to the child viewer. But as you grow up, the relevance of these shows doesn't necessarily fade away. What cartoons from these eras managed to achieve was the presentation of meaning to any age group who watched them. A child can relate to the silly antics and slapstick comedy on the surface. A teenager can see the meaning in the lessons of characters' struggles, whether that be navigating their first romance or forgiving their friends. And an adult can see the humor in the way the stories poke fun at the world they live in now. These creators manage to speak to the child in every viewer, whether they be literally a kid or they are speaking to an adult's inner child. The humor still resonates. The other aspect of these shows that I believe causes people to look back so fondly upon them is their faith in the viewer's maturity and thematic literacy at a young age. Bridging the gap from little kids programming to a viewer base spanning ideally from 8 to 16 years old is incredibly difficult to achieve. An 8-year-old knows they're too old for the Teletubbies, but how do you make sure that the same feeling doesn't appear again for Adventure Time or Samurai Jack? The means they achieved this through was by not dumbing down their shows to an extent that it was limiting or exclusionary. These shows managed to incorporate more advanced emotional concepts, artistic depictions and decisions, and ideological explanations in a means that is digestible to a younger audience and is predicated upon assumption that they will be able to understand it. They may not be able to understand it in that moment, but as the viewer continues to develop and grow, layers of the show are revealed that were not present at a younger age. It's a feeling that is important to young viewers and a means that makes the program enjoyable to older ones. It seems that much of the contemporary kids' cartoon programming lacks this ability. Instead, the creators are relegating their younger audiences and viewers to what their perceived level of understanding is. The show may be funny when they are kids, but as they grow up, they will not have the same ability to resonate as older generations have had with shows of the past. What made cartoons so great before was their level of maturity hidden within the facade of a kids' TV show. When the expectation shifts away from this, what we are left with is the sophomoric humor in shows that feel shallow that now fill the air. Instead of regular show, kids get fanboy and chum chum. And it's here where the difference is glaring. You know, maybe I'm just ranting about Unk Slop going back in my day, but that's just my 2 cents on this. I noticed a lot of kids shows had been intended for adults too, and thought I'd talk about a few of them and why I think these shows were important. What do you think? Am I extremely wrong? Am I just ranting about Unk Slop? This was a lot more opinionated than my usual video, so let me know your opinions. What was your favorite show? Let me know below. If you'd like to continue supporting me in different ways, make sure you like and subscribe if you haven't already. You can also subscribe to my Patreon. I will be uploading newsletters and sort of half-baked videos there, stuff that is cool to me but lacks enough depth to be a full-length video. So, sort of Ratman minis, you feel? I also sell stickers. There's going to be new ones soon. I appreciate you watching. Anyways, bye-bye.